You seriously think it makes sense to ask him about finance? He's a waiter, Nora. The words were meant to be a joke. Nora Sterling, 42, CEO of Sterling Ridge Capital, swirled the red wine in her glass and let a practiced half-smile curve her lips. The private dining room at Brasserie 41 was narrow and softly lit, the kind of place where powerful people whispered over rare vintages and signed away other people's futures between dessert and espresso. She hadn't been irritated. Not yet. She wore a fitted ivory blazer, silk blouse, and the expression of a woman who'd grown accustomed to brushing off foolish remarks before they could stain her mood. Across from her, board member Gregory Pike lounged in his chair, smirking with the assurance of a man who had never been meaningfully challenged by anyone outside his tax bracket. Beside them stood the waiter he'd just dismissed. Tall, black, hands wrapped around a polished wine bottle. His posture was easy, but not submissive, and there was a stillness in his eyes that didn't belong to someone who spent their evenings reciting specials and pouring Bordeaux. Nora hadn't looked twice at him when he first approached. In her head, he'd only been a prop in the night. Dark apron, crisp shirt, neutral tone. Background. She hadn't even asked his name. "Relax, Greg," Nora said lightly, eyes on the deep red in her glass. "You think I'm actually asking for real advice?" It was supposed to be an entertaining throwaway line. A tiny performance? Ask the waiter what he thinks of the almost $8 billion merger. Let the table laugh. Remind everyone she was still loose enough, confident enough, to joke about decisions that would shake the street. So when she lifted her gaze and said, almost lazily, "What do you think then? Should I sign the Carol Lane merger or walk?" She wasn't expecting an answer that mattered, but the waiter met her eyes, directly, calmly, and said in a voice that didn't tremble, didn't apologize, "If you sign that merger, ma'am, you'll lose everything you've built." The air changed. Sound from the main dining room outside seemed to drain away. Even the golden candlelight on the table looked different, like the flames themselves had leaned in to listen. Nora blinked once, slowly. She wasn't unused to being questioned. She'd fought men twice as arrogant as Gregory for her seat at the table. She clawed her way out of Midwestern obscurity into a Manhattan skyline that now bore her initials on two glass towers. But she had never been challenged by someone in a black apron holding a wine key. Gregory recovered first. He barked out a laugh that bounced sharply off the wood-paneled walls. "Oh, that's priceless," he chuckled. "The busboy thinks he's Buffett." Nora felt heat rise in her chest. Not embarrassment, anger. Anger at being undermined in front of a man who already doubted a woman's competence, who already thought of her as a polished front for the real power in the room. She turned her gaze back to the waiter, narrowing her eyes. "Is that so?" she said coolly. "Then tell me, why shouldn't I sign?" Most people would have backed down then. Mumbled an apology, blamed nerves, laughed it off before the rich people took it personally. He didn't. He didn't shuffle his feet, didn't look at Gregory, didn't cast around for permission to keep speaking. He simply answered. "Because their numbers are lying," he said, voice steady. "Their debt profile isn't real. They've hidden liabilities under shell subsidiaries that don't show up in the primary filings. If you connect the pre-amendment structures, the whole thing tips over, and it takes your firm with it." Nora's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. That was not the kind of answer a random waiter guessed. Gregory rolled his eyes so hard she could practically hear it. "For God's sake," he scoffed. "You've picked up some conspiracy podcast nonsense, haven't you? Go refill the breadbasket, son. Leave the grown-ups to handle the balance sheets." Nora's jaw clenched. "You know nothing about this deal," she snapped, sharper than she intended. "You're a waiter. Don't pretend you're anything else." For a brief second, something flickered in his gaze. Not hurt, not defensiveness. A tiredness. The kind you saw in people who had watched the same bad movie play on loop and were forced to sit through it every night. "Truth doesn't care what's printed on my name tag," he replied quietly, "and it won't care about your title when the collapse hits." The room went very, very quiet. Even Gregory's smirk faltered. There was no swagger in the man's tone, no arrogance, no look-at-me drama, just a settled resignation, the voice of someone who had already lived through the kind of wreckage he was describing. Nora forced air through her nose, smoothed the irritation out of her features, and signaled for the check with a small flick of her wrist. She wanted the night to move on. She wanted Gregory to stop looking at her like he just watched a circus act go off script. Most of all, she wanted to forget that a man paid to refill water glasses had planted the first real doubt she'd had about the Caroline merger in months. But hours later, high above the city in her glass-walled penthouse, she could still hear his voice. "You'll lose everything you've built." She tried to drown it. She poured herself another expensive red she no longer tasted. She spread the merger binder across her marble kitchen island and flipped through projections, synergy charts, risk scenarios. Numbers she had already memorized. Slides she had rehearsed so many times she could recite them in her sleep. Except tonight, they looked off. Not wrong. Not obviously fraudulent. Just like a painting she'd always thought was perfectly straight, now suddenly tilted by half a degree. Her eyes snagged on a footnote she'd skimmed 10 times without really registering. Projected cash flow adjustment. Q3 post-consolidation. Adjustment justified by amended debt restructuring schedule. She frowned. "Why would they amend after agreeing to our covenants?" she murmured. She flipped back 2 sections. A subsidiary name repeated in one chart, then appeared slightly altered in another. Same address, slightly different incorporation date. Her stomach tingled. She remembered the waiter's calm voice. "They've buried liabilities under subsidiaries you won't find unless you trace the original pre-amendment documents." "That's too specific," she muttered. "Way too specific." It was 1 a.m. by the time she gave up pretending she wasn't bothered. At 1:07, she opened her laptop and pulled up the raw filings instead of the polished board deck. At 1:19, she found the first inconsistency in Caroline's cash flow statement. Tiny, easy to miss, but real. At 1:31, she found another. At 1:43, she stared at a line item that might have been nothing or might have been the beginning of something very, very wrong. "That's not possible," she whispered. But it was. Or it could be. And the most infuriating part was simple. She would never have looked closely enough to see any of this if not for that man in a black apron. By 1:52, she was pacing barefoot across the polished floor, city lights flickering like restless neurons below. By 1:59, she grabbed her coat. At 2:11 a.m., Nora Sterling stood on the sidewalk outside Brasserie 41 in 4-inch heels and a boiled-over mind, staring at the darkened restaurant through the glass. The chairs were flipped onto tables. The bar was wiped down. Only the faint glow of the city reflected in the windows. She knocked anyway. After a minute, a sleepy-eyed busser cracked open the side door, squinting at her like he was seeing things. "Uh, we're closed," he said. "Kitchen shut down an hour ago." "I'm not here for the kitchen." Her voice came out tighter than she intended. "The tall server from earlier. Black guy, calm voice. Where is he?" Recognition flickered across the young man's face. "Darius?" he asked. So that was his name. "He just left," the busser added. "He walks to the bus stop on 47th, the one with the flickering light." "Thank you," Nora said, already turning away. The wind knifed between the buildings as she walked, rattling metal grates and tugging at her coat. Traffic had thinned to a lazy stream of taxis and delivery vans. Somewhere, a siren wailed, then faded. She saw him before he saw her, standing beneath a tired street lamp that blinked every few seconds, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders bowed by a long shift, but not broken, not slumped. Darius. He looked up as she approached. No surprise, no flinch, just a quiet curiosity that made her suddenly aware of how absurd this must look. A billionaire CEO in a tailored coat, hunting down a waiter in the middle of the night. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. She crossed her arms. Not out of superiority this time, but because something inside her felt unsteady. "I want you to explain what you meant," she said. "All of it. Every part you didn't say at the table." Behind him, a bus growled up to the curb and hissed as the doors folded open. Darius stepped aside automatically, leaving the path clear, but didn't move to get on. He studied her for a moment, like he was trying to decide if she was real or something his exhausted brain had made up. "You really came back," he said quietly. "I did." She heard the edge in her own voice and let it stay. Because I think you might be right. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Not triumph, not smugness, pain. If you really want the truth, he said, you're not going to like what you hear. Tell me anyway. The bus driver, impatient, waited a few seconds more, then closed the doors and pulled away, leaving them in a patch of silence and bad streetlight. Darius nodded once, not like a subordinate agreeing to take instructions, but like an equal acknowledging another equal. Then we start at the beginning, he said. A gust of cold air swept between them, carrying the smell of exhaust, wet pavement, and something older, fear maybe, or inevitability. Nora Sterling, who had built an empire on never second-guessing herself, realized she had just stepped across a line she couldn't uncross. A warning had been spoken. A joke had turned into a fracture. And under a weak, flickering street lamp, the richest woman in the deal and the poorest man in the conversation began the first night of the truth that would upend both of their lives. If you've ever brushed off a warning you wish you'd listened to, ask yourself this. Would you have gone back to ask a waiter for answers? Because Nora did. And that single decision was about to change everything. The street lamp hummed above them, casting a cone of tired yellow light over cracked concrete and subway grates. Somewhere down the block, a taxi horn blared and then faded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You said we start at the beginning, Nora said at last. So start. Darius glanced once down the street, as if checking the darkness itself for eavesdroppers, then back at her. Not here, he said. You don't want the whole story standing under a flickering bulb on 47th. Her pride bristled. I didn't come out here to be handled, Mr. Cole, he said. Darius Cole. Ah, fine, Mr. Cole. I walked out of my penthouse at 2 in the morning because you told me I'd lose everything I'd built. You don't get to dodge me now. A corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, more like an acknowledgement. I'm not dodging you, he said. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to understand why you're a target. Excuse me? He exhaled slowly, breath clouding in the cold. Go home, he said. Pull the raw filings, not the glossy board deck. Look at Carol Lane's debt schedule. Check their pre-amendment subsidiary structure. When you see it, call me. If you still want answers after that, I'll give you everything I have. Her jaw tightened. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he said simply. You should trust the numbers. They're already trying to warn you. For a heartbeat, she considered forcing the issue, demanding more, dragging him into a cab if she had to. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not fear, acceptance. The look of a man who knew exactly how far powerful people would go when they were cornered. Fine, she said, stepping back. But if this is some elaborate performance for sympathy or cash, you've picked the wrong mark. If this were about cash, he said quietly, I would have kept my mouth shut a long time ago. He turned away, hands sinking deeper into his coat pockets, long stride carrying him toward the intersection. She watched him disappear into the night, that odd stillness in his shoulders lingering in her mind long after he rounded the corner. Nora Sterling did not usually take advice from strangers, but as she rode the elevator back up to her penthouse, his words threaded through the hum of the machinery. They've buried liabilities under shell subsidiaries. When it falls, it takes you with it. She tossed her coat across a chair, kicked off her heels, and walked straight to her office. The city glowed outside the wall of glass. Midnight Manhattan, glittering and indifferent. But the light that mattered was the harsh, white rectangle of her laptop screen. She opened the data room. No polished decks, no summaries, just raw filings. The kind most CEOs insisted their teams digest for them. She dove in. At first, she saw what she'd always seen: projected uplift, post-merger synergies, cost-saving assumptions. Then she slowed down. A cash flow adjustment listed in Q3. Small, almost nothing. Justified by an amendment that hadn't been flagged for board approval. A subsidiary with a nearly identical name to one she recognized. Same address, same directors, incorporated 3 weeks later and used only once in the notes. A refinance line that magically improved the leverage ratio without any corresponding change in interest obligations. The hairs on her arms rose. She pulled up the pre-amendment structure Carol Lane had shared 6 months prior. Side by side, the diagrams almost matched, until they didn't. A missing box here. A shifted entity there. Enough to hide something, but only if you weren't looking for it. She hadn't been. Now she was. Damn you, she whispered, not sure if she meant Darius for being right or herself for not seeing it sooner. Her phone lay on the desk, screen dark. She stared at it for a long moment, then scrolled to a name she rarely used. Daniel Cho, former SEC enforcement. It rang 3 times. Nora? His voice was rough with sleep. You do realize normal people are unconscious right now? Normal people don't run funds this size, she replied. I need your brain for 10 minutes. Make it 5. She sent him a screenshot of an anonymized structure. No names, no logos, just numbers and lines. Off the record, she said, if you saw this come across your radar, what would you think? Silence. She heard the rustle of sheets, the click of a lamp, the faint buzzing sound of a laptop waking up on his end. Where did you get this? He asked. Humor me. He exhaled through his teeth. I'd say someone's playing 3-card Monte with liabilities, Daniel said. Shells moving, short-term debt relabeled, risk pushed just far enough away to make regulators squint instead of dive. Is it illegal? Depends, he said. If the intent is to conceal material debt during a major transaction, then yes, very. Have you heard any noise about Carol Lane lately? She asked. He hesitated, which told her everything. I've heard they're quiet, he said. Too quiet. No one likes quiet in that house. Makes them nervous. That's all? That's all I can say without a badge, he replied. But Nora, if this is your deal, it is. Then your gut is late, not early, he said. Trust it, and move carefully. He hung up before she could reply. She sat there, phone still pressed to her ear, the whisper of dial tone replaced by the louder thrum inside her chest. Trust your gut. Move carefully. Careful had never kept anyone alive on Wall Street, but careless got them killed. She pulled up the restaurant receipt in her email. Brasserie 41, server D. Cole. There was a number in the system, a requirement for payroll, for emergency contact. She copied it into her phone. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she stopped. No, not like this. She needed to look him in the eye. By the time gray light edged the horizon, she'd slept 2 hours. She showered, dressed in a charcoal suit sharper than armor, and rode the elevator down with a new weight between her ribs. At 8:02 a.m., she stepped into the lobby of Sterling Ridge Capital. Employees greeted her with their usual mixture of awe and obligation. Morning, Miss Sterling. Good morning, Nora. She nodded, answered automatically, moved through the marble hall like a figurehead on a ship everyone assumed would always stay upright. But her mind wasn't in the building. It was at a bus stop under a bad street lamp. Underneath the conference calls and email chimes, a quiet drumbeat had started. He was right. He was right. He was right. By late morning, she couldn't stand it anymore. She walked out of the tower without telling her chief of staff where she was going. Across 2 blocks of traffic and 1 crosswalk, where a cab nearly took her out, she found herself back on 47th. Brasserie 41 was closed between lunch and dinner, but across the street, in a small coffee shop with fogged windows and mismatched chairs, she saw him. Darius sat in the corner by the window, a notebook open, a cheap pencil moving across the page. No apron, just a plain dark jacket and a focus so intense it seemed to shut out the rest of the room. For a second, Nora hesitated. Then she pushed the door open and stepped into the smell of espresso and burnt sugar. He noticed her halfway across the room. Surprise flickered over his features and vanished beneath that same unsettling calm. Ms. Sterling, he said, didn't think you were the type to double-check waitstaff opinions? I'm not, she said, sliding into the chair across from him without asking. But I checked the filings. And you're either a savant or very familiar with this kind of crime. He studied her for a long moment. What do you want from me? He asked. The truth? All of it. He tapped the pencil against the table once, twice. You're sure? Yes. Because once I tell you, you're in the same fight that got me erased, he said calmly. They didn't just ruin my career, Miss Sterling. They rewrote reality around me so cleanly that people stopped believing I had ever told the truth. Her throat tightened. Tell me anyway. He leaned back, eyes never leaving hers. I was a senior quantitative analyst at Carol Lane, he said. 4 years ago, they put me on a project to overhaul their liquidity modeling. Big task, high visibility, the kind of thing that gets you on promotion shortlists if you play along. And you didn't, Nora said. I did it first, he said. I built the engine they asked for. Clean, conservative, transparent. Then about 6 months in, I started seeing entries I didn't put there. He looked down at his notebook for a moment, as if he could still see those numbers burned into the page. Short-term liabilities relabeled long-term. Off-balance sheet structures feeding into revenue lines. Nothing huge, nothing obvious. But whoever did it understood the system well enough to twist it without tripping standard alerts. And you reported it. To my direct supervisor, he said. Then risk, then internal audit. I thought someone would fix it. Instead, someone fixed me. His tone never rose, but the words landed like weights. They accused me of breaching clearance, said I'd tampered with protected models. Suddenly, my access was revoked, my name was flagged for misconduct, and HR was handing me a termination letter written days before the investigation ended. Nora's stomach turned. You didn't have counsel? He gave a short, humorless huff. With what money? He asked. My mother's medical bills were already more than my savings. Once the rumors spread, the interviews dried up. Black analyst with a questionable integrity event on his record. No one wants that smoke. He lifted his coffee cup, then set it down without drinking. So I took the job I could get, he finished. Brasserie 41. Day shifts, night shifts. Enough to keep the lights on and the pharmacy quiet. That's how I ended up pouring wine for the woman they lined up as Carol Lane's perfect scapegoat. Scapegoat, she repeated, the word acidic. They need someone respectable to front the fall, he said. Someone the market trusts so much that when the numbers finally crack, everyone assumes it was your arrogance, not their design. Nora stared at him. Why didn't you go public? She asked. The press, regulators. Who would listen? He asked gently. A disgraced ex-employee with no documents and a misconduct flag on his record? The story was already written before I was out the door. He opened his notebook and slid it toward her. On the page was a hand-drawn version of Carol Lane's structure, lines and arrows connecting entities she'd seen in the data room. Last time I backed everything up, he said. Models, logs, email traces. I still have some of it. Not all. The system wiped a lot when they locked me out. But enough to know this merger is built on the same core fraud. They just dressed it better. She swallowed. I want to see it. He raised an eyebrow. My place isn't a penthouse, Miss Sterling. I'm not there for the decor, she said. I'm there for the proof. Again, that faint, almost smile, gone as quickly as it came. All right, he said. But once you see it, you don't get to pretend you didn't. They left the coffee shop together, stepping into a city that suddenly felt sharper, edges more pronounced. She matched his pace down the subway stairs, the smell of metal and brake dust wrapping around them as a train roared past. Darius lived in a neighborhood Nora had only ever passed through in the back of black cars. Not dangerous, just ignored. Brick walk-ups leaning into each other like tired men. Kids' scooters abandoned on stoops. A mural half-finished on a corner wall. The kind of place that never made it into the investor reels about vibrant urban living. He unlocked the door to a narrow third-floor apartment and stepped aside. It was small, but meticulous. A worn gray couch, a low table with coasters lined up like soldiers, a single plant in the window, stubbornly alive under too little light. On one wall, a bookcase sagged under the weight of finance texts, coding manuals, and 2 shelves of battered paperbacks. And on a desk in the corner sat an aging laptop, its casing cracked and repaired with strips of black tape. On the wall above the desk hung 2 photos. Darius in a graduation gown, arm around an older woman with proud eyes. Darius in a Carol Lane conference room, younger, tie slightly crooked, grinning in front of a whiteboard filled with equations. No third photo. You can sit, he said, already moving to the desk. She stayed standing. You live alone? She asked. Unless bills now count as roommates, he said mildly. Yeah. He booted up the laptop. The fan whirred loud enough to rival a window AC unit. Before we do this, he said without looking at her, you need to understand something. What? Once we start digging, they won't let you back out, he said. They went after my reputation, my savings, my mother's insurance. When the system decides you don't exist anymore, it doesn't fire you. It erases you. Are you prepared for them to try that with you? Nora thought of her glass-walled office, the name on the building, the headlines that had called her the woman who broke the old boys club. She also thought of the slightly mismatched subsidiary names and the amended schedules that shouldn't exist. I'm prepared for them to try, she said. I'm not prepared to help them. He considered her answer, then nodded once. Okay, he said. Then let's take a look at what they hope you never see. The spreadsheet that loaded on the screen looked nothing like the polished models her team had shown her. It was raw, dense, cellular chaos. This is the original engine I built, Darius said. Liquidity, stress scenarios, contagion paths. Ugly but honest. He opened a second file. This is the version aligned with your merger packet. Watch. He tiled the windows side by side and began highlighting differences. Here, he said, pointing to a column, they rolled short-term liabilities into long-term without a corresponding change in covenant profile. On paper, Carol Lane looks more liquid. In reality, they've just hidden the cliff. He clicked again. Here, they push obligations into a downstream entity. No tax ID, no operational activity. It exists to absorb debt on paper until the day they let it collapse. Her pulse picked up. And this, he said, switching tabs, this cash flow spike, it's fabricated. The counterparty doesn't exist. They needed the bump to justify the valuation you're about to sign off on. Nora's breath felt thin. They built the whole thing on a lie, she whispered. They built it on layers of lies, Darius corrected. So many that by the time anyone untangles them, Carol Lane will have already dumped the worst of the risk onto Sterling Ridge, and onto you. Why me? She asked, the question ripping out before she could swallow it. Why Sterling? They could go after anyone. Because you're visible, he said. Respected. A symbol. If you go down, it sends a message. Even the woman who beat the boys was reckless. Makes people more willing to swallow whatever story they get fed about you. She stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Someone on my side helped them, she said. It wasn't a question. They had to, Darius said. These changes didn't happen from the outside. They needed access to your internal drafts to line everything up. At minimum, a CFO. More likely, someone higher, too. Leonard Sharp's face flashed through her mind. 15 years at Sterling. Calm, competent, consistently urging her to seize this once-in-a-lifetime alignment. Her jaw clenched. How do we prove it? She asked. You have two systems they don't control, Darius said. Your internal access logs, and whatever I managed to back up before they locked me out. He reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a small metal box, its hinges stiff with age. Inside, neat little rows of USB drives and printed pages waited like survivors. I saved these the night before they marched me out, he said. Couldn't carry much. Took enough. She lifted a handful of papers, annotated margins filled with his cramped handwriting. You've kept this for years? Truth doesn't spoil, he said quietly. It just waits. She set the papers down carefully and met his gaze. Then we stop waiting, she said. Tonight we go into my office after hours. We pull every internal draft and log we can reach. We overlay it with your backups and see exactly who has their hands in this. His eyes narrowed a fraction. That's going to put a target on your back. I'm beginning to think it's already there, she replied. The only question is whether I stand still and let them aim or move first. Silence stretched between them. It wasn't empty, it was weighty, filling the room with something that felt suspiciously like a choice. Finally, Darius closed the laptop. All right, he said. We do it your way. Tonight, after the building clears. He held out his hand. Not deferent, not presumptuous. An agreement. She looked at it for a second, then clasped it. His grip was firm, steady, real. As she rode back to Midtown hours later, merging into the evening rush of suits and coffee cups and glass towers, Nora Sterling felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not yet, a beginning. That night, long after most of the office had emptied and janitors began their quiet rituals, Nora swiped her badge at the private entrance to the 34th floor. Security nodded and let her pass. Working late, Mrs. Sterling? Big week, she replied. Her heart didn't speed up until she saw Darius already waiting in the shadows opposite the elevator bank. Black coat, hands in his pockets, the metal box tucked under one arm. What's our story if anyone stops you? She whispered. I'm consulting, he said, which is basically true. She almost smiled. They slipped into her office. From this height, the city lay beneath them, like a constellation of restless stars. Her desk lamp cast a soft circle of light over documents and framed awards, and the silver pen set Elias Rowan, the chairman who'd first championed her, had given her when she'd been appointed CEO. She turned on the monitor. The familiar Sterling Ridge login screen bloomed into view. Darius set the box on the desk and connected one of his drives to the tower. Start with the latest merger draft, he said. We'll work backward. The file loaded. He tiled their two worlds side by side again. The clean engine he had built years ago, and the distorted structure she was being asked to bless. For nearly an hour, the only sounds in the room were clicking keys, the distant hum of HVAC, and the muted roar of New York against the glass. Here, an altered classification. There, a shifted maturity date. Somewhere deeper, a conditional formula that changed output depending on user credentials. It's not just static fraud, Darius said quietly. They've coded it to show different versions depending on who opens it. Her shoulders tightened. Executives see one thing, auditors another, partners yet another, he explained. It keeps everyone just satisfied enough not to dig. How many people can even build something like this, she asked. A handful, he said, and only with help from inside your system. He opened the document properties and scrolled. Who has edit access on your side, he asked. Her eyes scanned the list. Leonard Sharp Sterling Ridge. Priya DC Sterling Ridge. Generic board review. Leonard is the CFO, she murmured. Priya runs enterprise risk. The board account is a shared access for pre-reading. Your risk head might be clean, Darius said, or she might be getting played. Sharp, though, these timestamps? He's been in and out at 2 and 3 in the morning. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. Because he wasn't working for you, Darius said. He was working on you. Her skin crawled. She stepped away from the desk, needing air, putting a few feet between herself and the glow of the screen. That's when she heard it, a soft metallic click from the hallway, the sound of a handle being tested. Darius went still, another slow twist of the latch. Not a janitor's casual check, a deliberate, cautious test. Nora's heart thudded against her ribs. I didn't lock it, she whispered. Darius moved without sound to the side of the door, body angled just out of sight from whoever might look in. His eyes sharpened in a way she hadn't seen before. Alert, measuring distance, calculating options. The handle turned a fraction of an inch. Stopped. Silence. Footsteps retreated, slow and steady, down the corridor. They both stood frozen, listening, until the distant ding of the elevator and the soft whoosh of closing doors told them whoever it was had left the floor. Darius waited another 30 seconds before speaking. They know you're here, he said quietly, and they didn't knock to say hello. How? Her voice shook more than she liked. My badge? Your badge logs, your system access. Sharp, or whoever he's working with, probably flagged unusual after-hours behavior. She felt suddenly exposed in her own office, the glass walls that had once signaled transparency now feeling like an aquarium. We're not safe up here, he said. Not tonight. She grabbed the metal box. He yanked the drive from the tower. They moved quickly, lights off, down the back hallway toward the emergency stairwell. Elevator? She whispered. Bad idea, he said. You can get trapped in elevators. They descended in silence, footsteps absorbed by the concrete. By the time they stepped out onto the street, the night wind hit her like a bucket of cold water. Traffic roared, lights flashed, horns blared. Normal chaos. But inside, everything had shifted. They're watching you, Darius said, scanning the street as if expecting eyes in every car. They're watching both of us now, she replied. He didn't contradict her. Tomorrow, he said, you need to pull the access logs. Find out exactly who's been touching those files and when. If we're going to expose this, we need more than suspicion. And what will you do? She asked. He looked down the avenue, jaw tight. I'm going to find the piece of this story even Carol Lane doesn't know I still have, he said. The one thing they couldn't wipe when they scrubbed me out of their history. Nora Sterling pulled her coat tighter against the wind. For the first time since she'd signed her name on the CEO contract, she understood something that had always been true but never felt this real. The most dangerous battles on Wall Street weren't fought in the market, they were fought in the dark, between people with everything to lose, and people who believed they'd already lost enough. Tonight she'd chosen a side, and she knew the fight was only beginning. The alarm on Nora's phone vibrated her awake long before the sun found its way between the skyscrapers. For a moment she lay still, mind disoriented by the fragments of the night before. A door handle turning, footsteps receding, Darius's voice low in the stairwell saying, "They know you're here." Then it all snapped back into place. She swung her legs out of bed, the hardwood cold under her feet, and moved through the motions of getting ready with mechanical precision. Shower, hair, navy suit, neutral heels. Makeup that suggested control even when she did not feel it. By the time she stepped into the lobby of Sterling Ridge Capital, the building hummed with its usual morning energy. Security badges beeped, elevators dinged, baristas on the mezzanine shouted orders. To everyone else, it was just another weekday. To her, it felt like walking into a house she knew someone had already tried to break into. "Morning, Ms. Sterling," her chief of staff, Ethan, called, half jogging to keep up as she strode toward the executive elevators. "Sharp is asking if you'll be ready to present the final Carol Lane recommendation at the board pre-brief this afternoon." "Tell Leonard I'll confirm later," she said. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Plenty," she said. "None of it you're going to fix by blocking my path to the elevator." He fell back, stung, and she immediately regretted the snap. But today was not a day she could afford to soothe bruised egos. The doors slid open on the 34th floor. The corridor to her office seemed longer than usual, every footstep echoing louder than it should. Priya Desai was waiting near her door, head of enterprise risk, burgundy suit, dark hair pulled back, not a strand out of place, eyes sharp behind understated glasses. "Nora," she said, "do you have a minute?" "I'm counting them," Nora replied. "Walk with me." They stepped into the office together. Nora closed the door and leaned against it for a moment as Priya watched her quietly. "You don't look like a woman about to close the biggest deal of her career," Priya said. "Maybe that's because the deal isn't what we thought it was," Nora answered. Priya's brows knit slightly. "Explain." "I need full access to the internal system logs for all Carol Lane-related documents," Nora said. 6 months back, every pull, every edit, every view. Priya blinked. "That's not a small request." "I'm aware." "It also isn't standard," Priya added carefully. "Those logs are tightly controlled. I can pull samples for audit, but a full extraction requires CFO sign-off." "I'm not asking Leonard to bless this," Nora said. A beat of silence stretched. "This isn't a routine review, then," Priya said quietly. "No," Nora replied. "It's not." Priya walked to the window and stared out at the skyline for a moment, thinking. When she turned back, the usual corporate polish in her expression had cracked. Only a hairline fracture, but visible. "I've noticed things too," she said. Nora's pulse skipped. "What things?" "Sharp's been in the office late," Priya said. "Very late. More than usual. Taking calls in the hallway. Using generic board access credentials to open files he could have accessed under his own." "Why didn't you bring this to me?" Nora demanded. "Because I didn't know if it was relevant," Priya said. "And because everyone keeps telling me you're under pressure to push this through." She mimed quotes with her fingers. It sounded like anyone who raised concerns about Carol Lane right now would find themselves reassigned to people analytics in Des Moines. Nora closed her eyes for a second, anger not at Priya, but at the invisible narrative swirling around her without her consent. "I'm not reassignment-proof myself, it seems," she murmured. Priya stepped closer. "What's really going on, Nora?" she asked. "Because the way you're asking for these logs, it sounds like you already know something's rotten." Nora thought of Daniel's warning, of Darius's tired eyes in the coffee shop, of the door handle turning in the dark. "I'm not ready to tell you everything," she said. "Not yet. But I will say this. If you pull those logs for me, you're helping protect this firm from a very deliberate setup." Priya studied her for several long seconds, weighing more than just data, weighing loyalty, risk, career trajectory. Finally, she exhaled. "I'll get them," she said, quietly, "by end of day. Thank you." Don't thank me yet, Priya replied. If there really is something in those logs, we're both going to wish we'd stayed ignorant a little longer. When she left, the office felt emptier than usual. Nora sat behind her desk, opened her laptop, and froze. Something was wrong. Yesterday's carefully organized folders were slightly rearranged, like someone had opened them and put them back in the wrong order. A spreadsheet she distinctly remembered saving on the desktop was gone. She clicked through directories faster, breath hitching. Her private cross-referenced notes on the suspect subsidiaries, missing. Her annotated PDF with circled anomalies, missing. The draft email she'd started to herself, outlining questions she planned to ask the board, deleted. Cold washed through her. Someone hadn't just tested her door. They'd let themselves in after she left and surgically removed anything that suggested she'd begun to connect the dots. She grabbed her phone and dialed. He answered on the first ring. "You're at the office already," Darius said. Not a question. "Yes," she said, voice low. "And whoever tested my door last night came back in daylight." "What did they take?" "All my notes, every file that tied Carol Lane to the anomalies we saw. They didn't touch contracts, didn't touch personal stuff, just the merger evidence." He swore under his breath, quiet, controlled. "Listen to me," he said. "You need to leave the building." "I can't just walk out again, Darius. It'll look suspicious," he cut in. "It already is. They're watching your access. They know you were working late. Now they know you're onto them. People don't risk physical entry unless they're desperate." She pressed her fingertips into the edge of the desk. "I have to wait for the logs from Priya," she said. "Then I'll go." "Do not let anyone get you alone in a room with a door that locks," he said. "No quick chats, no impromptu pre-meetings. If Sharp or any board member wants to talk, you bring someone you trust into the room or you don't go in." "That's paranoid." "It's survival," he said. "You told me you were prepared for them to try to erase you. This is what that looks like at the beginning." A knock at her door made her jolt. "Nora?" Ethan's voice muffled. "You asked for an updated timeline slide for the pre-brief?" "I've got it." "Come in," she called, pulse still racing. He stepped in, holding a folder. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you just saw next quarter's bonuses vanish." She forced a smile. "Just tired," she said. "It's nothing you can fix with a slide." "Suwana." He lingered a second longer, searching her face for something he couldn't name, then retreated. As the door clicked shut, she lifted the phone again. "I'll call you when I have the logs," she said. "I'll be at the restaurant until late afternoon," Darius replied. "After that, we meet somewhere public. Not your place. Not mine. Somewhere in between." "Bryant Park," she said. "Southwest corner, near the carousel." "Good," he said. "And Nora?" "Yes." "If they stole your files, they're scared," he said. "People only steal the truth when it's starting to threaten the lie." The line went dead, but his words stayed. The day stretched like a wire about to snap. Meetings, emails, small talk in hallways while her mind sprinted elsewhere. Sharp poked his head into her office twice, all concerned paternal energy and questions about how we're feeling heading into the big day. Each time she kept the conversation brief. Each time his eyes lingered on her computer, a fraction too long. By late afternoon, a message from Priya popped up on her screen. "Close the door." Nora did. 30 seconds later, Priya slipped into the office with a tablet in her hand and a tension in her posture that hadn't been there that morning. "I've got the logs," she said, "and you're not going to like them." "Show me." Priya brought up the screen. Columns and rows filled with timestamps, user IDs, file names. "First, standard activity," Priya said, scrolling. "Your team, mine, Sharp, all busy but explainable." She flicked to another filter. "Then there's this." Repeated entries glared up at them. Sharp Elm 041, Sharp L 0216, Sharp L Saturday 11:58 p.m. "Late night access to the internal Carol Lane models," Priya said. "No one else touches these files at those hours." Nora's stomach turned. "And then there's this," Priya added, tapping the screen. Several lines were blacked out. "Redacted entries," she said. "I didn't do this." "Redacted by who?" Nora asked. "The logs don't say," Priya replied. "Whoever did it has higher privileges than me. Board level, maybe above. They accessed merger documents through a generic review account and then wiped their own footprints. Only one board member had been around longer than Nora. Only one had both the clout and the technical paranoia to demand that kind of ghost access. Malcolm Vance, chairman, kingmaker. The man who'd pulled her out of a mid-level role and told the street she'd be the next generation's face of responsible finance. Her throat went dry. They wanted to see what you saw, Priya said quietly. Track when you open what? And they wanted to hide that they were watching. Nora forced herself to inhale. Don't tell anyone you've pulled these, she said. If anyone asks, deny it. If they push, blame a system glitch. Priya's eyes hardened. I'm not stupid, she said. I know exactly how ugly this could get. She hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, she added, if you're going up against whoever sits behind those redacted entries, you're going to need more than logs. I know, Nora said. I'm working on that part. When Priya left, Nora printed a copy of the most incriminating pages, folded them into a plain folder, and slid it into her bag. Then she walked out of the building without telling anyone where she was going. Bryant Park in early evening was a tangle of commuters and tourists and people pretending to read on benches while they scrolled their phones. The carousel at the southwest corner spun in lazy circles, children laughing as painted horses bobbed under strings of small lights. Darius stood near the fence, hands in his jacket pockets, gaze scanning the crowd. He looked different in daylight, not softened exactly, just more visible. Tell me something good, he said when she reached him. I can't, she said, but I can tell you something clear. She handed him the folder. He flipped it open, eyes moving quickly over the columns. Sharps all over this, he said. No surprise there. He turned the page. His jaw tightened. Redacted, he murmured. Of course. They scrubbed the logs, and she said, board access. Higher than Priya. Only a handful of people could do it. Vance, he said without hesitation. The name landing between them made the wind feel colder. You're sure? She asked. He was in the email threads last time, Darius said. Never directly ordering anything, but steering, suggesting, approving strategic masking. He didn't get his hands dirty, but the stain still belonged to him. You have proof? She asked. Yes, he said. Some of it. Enough to point, not to nail. Then we need more. That's why I called you, he said. My locker at the restaurant got turned over today. Her head snapped up. What? Someone broke the lock, he said. Went through my bag. Didn't take cash. Didn't touch my phone. They were looking for drives, notes, anything that connected me to what happened at Carroll Lane. Did they find anything? No, he said. You've got most of it now. The rest isn't at the restaurant. Where is it? He looked past her for a moment, toward the line of skyscrapers framing the park. In the Bronx, he said, with my mother. Her brows rose. You left evidence of a multi-billion-dollar fraud at your mother's house? Not exactly, he said. I left an old external drive there. Pre-cloud, pre-wipe. I could only carry so much when they escorted me out. I backed up what I could the night before, then dropped it with her. Told her not to touch it unless I said so. And you think it's still there? I know it is, he said. If anyone had tried to take it, she'd have called me and the cops and the local news in that order. Despite herself, Nora's mouth curved. What's on it? She asked. Original model, he said. Email archives, system snapshots. The kind of thing no one expects a disgraced analyst to have the foresight to grab. And you think it can tie Vance to this? I think it can show the pattern, he said. And I think people like Malcolm never change the pattern. They just change the names on the deals. A gust of wind swept through the park, rustling leaves, making Nora pull her coat tighter. When do we go? She asked. Tonight, he said, before they decide to extend their search radius. That car you mentioned, she said, the one outside your restaurant. If they followed you to the locker, they might follow us tonight, he finished. And you still want to go? I don't want anything about this, he said, but I know what happens if we don't. She nodded once. Then we go. They met 2 hours later at a subway entrance downtown, far from both the restaurant and her building. No drivers, no black cars, just a Metro card and the anonymous press of bodies. The ride uptown rattled more than usual. At one stop, a teenager's music bled out of cheap earbuds, bass thumping against the windows. At another, a woman selling candy wove through the car, offering chocolate bars with a practiced pitch. Nora sat across from Darius, fingers laced together in her lap so tightly her knuckles ached. "What if your mother asks why I'm there?" she said. "She'll assume the truth," he replied, "that I finally brought someone from your world who actually believes me." His world, her world. The line between them felt thinner tonight. When they surfaced in the Bronx, the air felt different, thicker with cooking smells, apartment music, laughter. Kids chased each other down the sidewalk. An older man argued with a parking meter. Someone laughed so hard from a window above that it spilled onto the street. "Lively," Nora said quietly. "Yeah," Darius said. "The city doesn't end at 59th, no matter what your peers think." They walked 3 blocks to a brownstone with peeling paint but flower boxes in the windows. Darius took a breath before ringing the bell. The door opened on a petite woman with gray threaded through her hair and eyes that lit up the second she saw him. "Baby," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. "You didn't say you were coming today." "I wanted to surprise you," he said, voice softening in a way Nora hadn't heard before. Then his mother noticed Nora. "And you brought company," she said, delight sharpening her features. "Finally. I was starting to think you were hiding from every decent woman in New York." Nora flushed. "I'm—" "This is Nora," Darius interjected quickly. "We're working on something." His mother's eyes twinkled. She said. "Work. Come in before the neighbors freeze you both with their stares." The apartment was small but warm. Family photos crowded the walls. Darius at different ages, a younger woman who must have been his sister, a man whose absence now seemed as loud as the images. On a shelf near the TV sat a metal box, older than the one on Nora's desk, corners dented, lid slightly warped. His mother noticed her looking. "He told me I'm not allowed to throw that old thing out," she said. "Says it's important. I told him if it doesn't pay rent, it's lucky I'm sentimental." Darius shot Nora a quick, meaningful glance. "Can I grab it, Ma?" he asked. "Take whatever you need," she said, waving her hand. "Just don't take too long, or I'll feed your friend so much she never leaves." In the corridor, as they walked toward the door with the box, Nora whispered, "She seems strong." "She is," he said, "which is why I made sure the one piece of this they couldn't afford to find was with her." Outside, the street had shifted. A dark sedan idled at the corner, lights off, engine humming softly. Nora stiffened. "You see it?" she murmured. "Same car," he said. "Saw it outside the restaurant 2 nights ago. Different plate, same dent on the bumper, same parking habits." Her heart thudded. "What do we do?" "We don't lead them back to Manhattan with proof in our hands," he said. "We lose them down there." He jerked his head toward the subway entrance. They walked not too fast, like two people enjoying cold air, the metal box casually slung at his side. At the top of the stairs, Nora glanced back. The sedan's headlights blinked on. "Now," he said. They descended faster, weaving through commuters, tourists, kids with backpacks, until the crowd swallowed them. By the time the train doors closed behind them, her pulse was racing harder than it had in yesterday's board prep session. They didn't speak until they were halfway back toward Midtown. The metal box clamped between Darius's feet like an anchor. "What's on there that scares them this much?" she asked. He looked down at it for a moment, thumb tracing one of the dents. "Everything they thought they'd erased," he said, "and one name you're not ready to say out loud yet." She knew which one he meant. Malcolm Vance, chairman, mentor, architect of her rise. If he was the brain behind Sharp's hands, this stopped being just a bad deal and became something else entirely. A betrayal years in the making. The train rattled through the tunnel, sparks occasionally flickering outside the window. Somewhere behind them, a dark sedan prowled the surface streets, waiting for ghosts it couldn't see. Nora looked at Darius, at the box, at her reflection in the window. "What happens if we open that and it confirms everything?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Then you'll have to decide if you're ready to go to war with a man who taught you how the game works," he said. She thought of Vance's hand on her shoulder years ago, his calm voice telling her she was The future of ethical finance. Then she thought of her erased files, the redacted logs, the shell entities lined up like dominoes. Her jaw set. Then he made a mistake, she said. What mistake? He assumed I'd forgotten how to fight. The metal box sat on Nora's dining table like a relic, its battered surface at odds with the sleek expanse of marble beneath it. Darius snapped the latches open one by one. Each click sounded louder than it should have in the quiet penthouse. Inside, nestled between printed reports and dog-eared notes, lay an old external hard drive. Heavy, scratched, the kind no one bothered with anymore, in a world drunk on clouds and auto backups. Last time I plugged this in, he said, lifting it out carefully, I still believed the system would correct itself if I just shouted loud enough. And now, Nora asked. Now I know better, he said. Systems don't correct themselves. People do, when they're forced. He connected the drive to her laptop. The machine took a moment, then recognized the device with an almost anticlimactic chime. A directory appeared, folders labeled with dates, others with cryptic tags, baseline engine, pre-wipe, email, snapshots, final. Start with the engine, Nora said. He opened the first folder. A spreadsheet filled the screen, more chaotic than the one she'd seen on his own laptop, but bearing the same unmistakable fingerprints, conservative assumptions, detailed stress paths, clearly labeled risk flags. This is you, she said. He shrugged one shoulder. Was, he said. He opened a second file from a different folder. The same base structure, but with subtle, malignant edits. This is what they were moving toward, he said. Intermediate corruptions before the final version flew out to your data room. Side by side, the changes were impossible to ignore. Ratios tweaked, covenant tests softened, certain entities removed entirely from exposure chains. Look at this, he said, zooming into a comment field. They left hints in the metadata before they fixed their process. A username flashed. M. Vance Advisory. It felt like the room dropped 2 degrees. Advisory, Nora repeated. So he wasn't just passively informed. He was giving instructions, Darius said. Here and here. More comment bubbles. Can we smooth this spike? MV. Let's push this liability further down the structure. MV. Her chest tightened. All those late-night calls, the mentoring sessions where Vance had stressed pragmatism and seeing the bigger picture. She'd heard wisdom. Now she saw something colder. Open the emails, she said. He navigated to the archive folder. The earliest chain was mundane. Scheduling, travel, internal politics. Then came a thread labeled Subject, Project Meridian, Risk Envelope Meridian. Nora's stomach twisted. That was the word Vance had used in her second year at the firm, standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling window with his hands clasped behind his back. Be patient, he'd told her. The meridian moment will come, a point where all the angles converge. You'll know it when you see it. She'd thought he meant an opportunity to lead. He had, just not in the way she believed. Darius opened the email. Caro Lane executives discussed risk displacement and optimum sacrifice candidates. A masked recipient, hidden behind a legal forwarding system, chimed in occasionally with short, precise comments. The writing style was familiar, measured, dispassionate, a tone she'd seen in Vance's board memos for years. Scroll, she said, voice tight. Further down the thread, a message from the masked recipient appeared. Ensure Sterling's next chief is visible and disciplined, someone the market trusts, someone who appreciates the value of institutional loyalty more than the thrill of questioning upstream assumptions. Once installed, we can route the exposure package accordingly. Nora's hand curled into a fist. He picked me for this, she whispered. Not for the reasons I thought. Not because he believed I was better. Because I looked like a safe vessel to sink. Darius didn't say, I told you so. He didn't need to. Here, he said, opening another message chain. This one was shorter, sharper. If Sterling's chief hesitates on Meridian, we revisit option B. Remove her influence. Install more compliant leadership. S. S, Nora asked. Sharp, Darius said. Leonard's old handle, before he graduated to full-name signatures. The paint flaked off all at once. Vance, choosing her, Sharp, smoothing her into place. Carol Lane, building a bomb under her name. Everything that had felt like mentoring now looked like staging. Nora looked up from the screen. If we bring this to the board, Vance will deny everything, she said. He'll say the emails are doctored, that the comments are misinterpreted, that Sharp went rogue. He'll try, Darius said. He's built his whole legacy on being the man above suspicion. Regulators worship him. The press treats him like a statesman. Then we don't just take it to the board, Nora said. We take it to the shareholders and to the people who actually enjoy tearing down idols. You already sent some of this out, didn't you? Darius asked. She met his eyes. I forwarded a preliminary package to outside counsel and Daniel, she said. If I mysteriously forget my password tomorrow morning, there will still be a copy beyond these walls. A slow nod of respect. Then the only thing left, and he said, is to walk into that room and tell the truth loudly enough that they can't pretend they didn't hear it. The next morning, the building hummed with a strange electric tension. Everyone sensed something, even if they couldn't name it. Assistants whispered near printers, analysts clustered in corners. The usual pre-meeting banter in the executive corridor had given way to brittle silence. The shareholders' preliminary session was set for 10. At 9:47, Nora stood in front of her bathroom mirror, straightening the lapels of a deep charcoal blazer. Her reflection looked calm, almost icy. Only her eyes betrayed the undertow. On the dining table behind her, Darius flipped through the last of the printed exhibits. "You're sure you want me in there?" he asked. "You're the one they erased," she said. "They don't get to keep you invisible just because it's convenient." "You realize some of these people signed checks for institutions that blacklisted me," he said. "Good," she replied. "Let them see the man behind the lie they swallowed." He slipped the hard drive into his jacket pocket. "You go first," he said. "Walking in together is a good way to turn up the volume before you've even plugged in a laptop." She almost argued, then realized he was right. At 9:59, she pushed open the heavy doors to the main boardroom. The space was designed to intimidate. A long table of dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling glass on one side, displaying the city as if it were simply another asset on the firm's balance sheet. Malcolm Vance sat at the head, silver hair immaculate, tie knotted in the unhurried way of men who never had to rush. "Ah," he said, voice warm enough to frost a window. "There's our star." Around the table, directors and key shareholders turned their eyes toward her. Leonard Sharp sat halfway down the right side, pale, lips pressed tight. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Nora said, taking her seat at the far end. "There were last-minute materials I needed to review." "I'll assume they only strengthened your conviction," Vance said. "Our partners at Carol Lane are very eager." "I'm sure they are," she said. Behind her, near the back wall, staff and advisors stood along the perimeter. Darius slipped in quietly among them. If Vance noticed, he didn't show it. "We're here to confirm your recommendation, Nora," Vance said. "The numbers have been vetted. The street expects this. Let's formalize what everyone already knows is a wise move." Everyone. For years, that word had bound her to him like rope. She straightened the binder in front of her. "Before I recommend anything," she said, "we need to talk about the numbers you think have been vetted." A faint ripple of surprise moved around the table. "Is there a problem?" one shareholder asked. "Yes," Nora said. "Several." She tapped the remote in her hand. The screen behind her lit up with two side-by-side charts. "Here is Carol Lane's reported liquidity profile from the merger packet," she said. "And here is the original model built inside their own system years ago. The clean version, the corrupted version. The differences were glaring now that she knew where to look. Over the past several quarters," she continued, "short-term obligations were quietly relabeled as long-term without covenant adjustments. Off-balance sheet entities were used to shuffle debt away from scrutiny. Synthetic cash flow spikes appeared where no underlying activity existed." Sharp cleared his throat. "With respect, Nora, our risk team has already—" "Your team reviewed what you were given," she cut in, "not what was hidden." Her voice didn't rise, it sharpened. "The models in your packet use dynamic masking," she said. "They show different versions depending on who accesses them. Executives see one picture, auditors see another, potential partners see the rosiest of all." A low murmur broke out. This is a serious accusation, Vance said. We don't throw words like masking around lightly. I'm not throwing it, she said. I'm presenting it. With evidence. She nodded toward the back. Darius stepped forward, connecting the old hard drive to the boardroom console with steady hands. On the screen, file paths appeared. Dates, usernames, lines of code. This is Darius Cole, Nora said. Former Caro Lane analyst. He built the original liquidity engine and was subsequently fired when he raised concerns about manipulation. His name was smeared to protect the fraud we are now seconds away from endorsing. Is this some kind of joke? Sharp snapped. We're not turning a shareholder session into an employment tribunal. Vance's stare cut toward Darius. I don't recall inviting you, he said. That's because I wasn't invited, Darius replied calmly. I was deleted. I'm just here to reappear at an inconvenient moment. The corner of Nora's mouth almost quirked. Almost. Mr. Cole's archived data predates both his termination and the corrected models Caro Lane later distributed, Nora said. And the discrepancies between his work and what sits in our deal room point to intentional, coordinated deception. She clicked. The email chain labeled Project Meridian filled the screen. Masked recipient, familiar writing style, key sentences highlighted. Ensure Sterling's next chief is visible and disciplined. If she hesitates, remove her influence. The boardroom went still. Where did you get this? One director demanded. This could be fabricated. Digital forensics has already validated the metadata, Nora said. So has outside counsel. Full reports are en route to regulators as we speak. She let that hang. Sharp's face drained of color. Vance's jaw flexed once. Even if the emails are genuine, Vance said slowly, you are drawing conclusions that may not hold. Strategic planning is not fraud. We discuss leadership transitions all the time. Leadership transitions, she repeated. Is that what you call selecting a CEO specifically because she looks compliant enough to carry a bomb you built under her name? The word bomb hit the air like static. Nora, Vance said, voice edging toward warning. You are emotional, I understand. Discovering hidden risk can be unsettling. But this is not about my feelings, she said. It's about the behavior of men who wrap themselves in the language of integrity while quietly turning this firm into a shield for their personal bets. She changed slides again. Access logs, timestamps, redacted entries. Here's what our internal logs show, she said. Sharp accessing merger files repeatedly in the middle of the night. Board-level overrides scrubbing footprints. Generic reviewer accounts used to open and alter documents outside of normal checks. She looked straight at Leonard. Anything you'd like to explain before I read the part where you signed off on shifting liabilities into entities we were never told about? He opened his mouth, closed it. The sweat on his upper lip gleamed under the recessed lights. Nora, Vance said, you are putting this institution at risk by airing unverified concerns in front of shareholders. There is a process. The process was corrupted, she snapped. By you. She clicked one last time. On the screen, a comment bubble expanded beside a change in the model. Can we push this exposure further downstream? Sterling's balance sheet can absorb interim optics. M. Vance Advisory. The room erupted. Directors shouted over each other. A fund representative demanded an immediate recess. Another hissed into their phone, already calling counsel. Through the chaos, Vance remained preternaturally calm. He stood. I have devoted my life to protecting this firm, he said. Whatever those tags show, I have always acted in the interest of... No, Nora said. You acted in the interest of Malcolm Vance. For the first time since she'd known him, something like real anger cracked his composure. You wouldn't be sitting there without me, he said, voice dropping. I pulled you up when no one else believed in you. I told them to trust you, to trust your narrative. You were the symbol we needed. I'm not your symbol, she said. I'm the one thing you didn't account for. And what's that? A symbol who decided to stop reading from your script. She turned to the rest of the room. I am formally withdrawing my recommendation in favor of the Caro Lane merger, she said. Effective immediately, I am suspending all related processes pending regulatory review. Any attempt to move forward will be in direct opposition to evidence currently in the hands of federal authorities. You've gone mad, Vance said softly. You're burning the house you live in. I'm reinforcing the foundation, she said. And if that means losing a few walls, so be it. Security, summoned quietly by someone near the door, hovered in the periphery, unsure of who they were here for. Nora made it easy for them. Until a full independent investigation is complete, she said to the directors, I am requesting that Vance recuse himself from all Sterling Ridge decisions, effective now. You don't have the authority to, he began. She does, one of the largest shareholders cut in, eyes never leaving the screen. On matters of fiduciary risk, the CEO's duty is clear, and right now, her duty is to protect us from you. The words hit harder than any gavel. A motion was made. Hands were raised. Some hesitated. Enough did not. It wasn't the final reckoning. That would come later, in hearings and filings and careful statements to the press. But it was a crack in the statue. Security stepped closer to Vance. He looked at Nora, and for a heartbeat, she saw something almost like pride in his eyes. You learned well, he said. Just not the lessons you wanted, she replied. They escorted him out. When the door shut behind him, the noise died down to a stunned buzz. Nora stood very still at the far end of the table, binder closed, hands resting lightly on the wood. Darius remained against the back wall, a quiet figure holding the drive that had shifted the axis of the room. One of the directors cleared their throat. What now? They asked. Now we cooperate with investigators, Nora said. We open everything. We fix what we can. We rebuild what's worth saving. And we make sure everyone who helped engineer this pays in something other than golden parachutes. And you? Another shareholder asked. You may have just signed your own exit. She met their gaze. If protecting this firm cost me the title he handed me, she said, then I was never really CEO in the first place. I was just the prop in someone else's play. And for the first time in her career, Nora Sterling felt entirely, dangerously unscripted. Federal investigators did not arrive with sirens and spotlights. They came with briefcases and measured questions and a hunger for details. For 2 hours, Nora sat in a smaller conference room, walking them through timelines, access logs, model discrepancies. They asked about Vance's mentorship, about Sharp's midnight visits to the data room, about Carol Lane's too quiet reputation. They asked about Darius. She didn't hesitate. He told me the truth when every incentive in his world told him to stay quiet, she said. And he did it knowing the people who erased him once might try again. When they finally let her go, the sky outside the windows had shifted to washed-out afternoon. Darius waited in the hallway, hands folded, leaning against the wall as if it were the only steady thing in a moving building. How bad? He asked. They're opening a full case, she said. Subpoenas, forensic audits, the works. He nodded once. And you? I'll be under review, she said. They have to perform the ritual. Ask whether I ignored red flags, whether I was complicit. Were you? He asked gently. I was careless, she said, and I let admiration substitute for scrutiny. That won't happen again. They stepped out of the building together. The winter sun hung low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. People bustled past them, chatting about lunch and weekend plans, blissfully unaware that a few floors above, an empire had just shifted on its axis. Walk? Nora asked. He smiled slightly. Anywhere. They moved without destination for a while, letting the city's noise fill the spaces words couldn't reach yet. When they reached Bryant Park again, the carousel was still spinning, children yelling, parents half absorbed, half scrolling. Everything changed, she said quietly, and somehow, everything up here. She gestured to the park, the kids, the food stalls. Looks exactly the same. That's how big things fall, he said. Quietly, while the hot dog vendor still has to worry about whether he'll sell out before closing. She laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. You know, she said, this all started with me trying to score a clever laugh at your expense. I remember, he said. Ask the waiter what he thinks of the merger. And then your first word, she said, were, you'll lose everything you've built. I stand by the sentiment, he replied. She looked at him, really looked at him. You saved my career, she said. You saved the firm. You might have saved a chunk of the market from a catastrophic ripple. He shook his head. You saved yourself, he said. I just refused to let you keep pretending the ground was solid when it wasn't. She let that sit between them for a moment. What happens to you now? She asked. Well, he said, there's a good chance my name gets cleared in some formal sense. Maybe an apology buried in a regulatory footnote. Possibly a few firms start calling just to chat once they realize I've been sitting on a sharper toolkit than their current teams. Would you go back? She asked. To places like Caroline? No, he said. I'm done building engines for people who only want to weaponize them. If I come back to this world, it'll be on my terms. Or not at all. She nodded slowly. What do you want then? She asked. Really? He took a breath, watching his exhale cloud in the cold. I want to stop running from what happened, he said. I want to use what I know without having to apologize for making people uncomfortable. And I'd like a life that isn't always one step away from being erased. You deserve that, she said. And you? He asked. What do you want, now that Malcolm's script is in pieces? She thought about it. I want to rebuild Sterling without pretending nothing happened, she said. I want to put people like you and Priya in positions where you're encouraged to question, not punished for it. And I want to prove that ethical finance can be more than a tagline Malcolm used in keynote speeches. She hesitated. And, she said slowly, I want to stay connected to the person who looked me in the eye in a restaurant and told me the truth when I had all the power and you had none. A long pause. The wind tugged at his jacket. You will, he said, if you really want that. I do, she said. He nodded once as if sealing something. Then here's some unsolicited advice, he said, from a waiter you clearly haven't learned to stop listening to. She smiled properly this time. Go on. Hire someone whose only job is to disagree with you, he said. Fund internal whistleblowers instead of burying them. And don't ever let your title be so loud that it drowns out the quiet voices telling you when something is wrong. She swallowed, feeling the truth of it settle into her like a new foundation. You know, she said, that sounds like a role someone with your experience could design. Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Sterling? He asked. I'm offering you a conversation, she said. Off the clock, over dinner, where I promise not to turn you into a prop for a joke. He chuckled, a real sound this time. As long as you don't open with, so, how do you feel about leverage buyouts? No promises, she said. They started walking again, steps falling into an easy rhythm. No grand speeches, no violins, just two people who had climbed out of systems designed to flatten them, now choosing to walk forward, together, towards something neither of them could quite name yet. At the corner, she glanced at him. Darius? Yeah? Thank you, she said, for not letting my arrogance be the reason your truth stayed buried. He didn't answer with words. He reached out, lightly brushing his fingers against hers. A question? A promise? A simple acknowledgement that they were, from now on the same side of something larger than both of them. She let her hand stay. As the city lights flickered on around them, casting their overlapping shadows across the pavement, Nora Sterling understood something that went deeper than any quarterly report. Justice wasn't just what happened in that boardroom when a giant was finally forced to answer for the harm he'd done. Justice was also this: a black waiter whose first unwelcome words had cracked open a billionaire's certainty, a CEO who chose the discomfort of truth over the comfort of approval. Two lives that should never have intersected in any story Malcolm Vance wrote, now walking side by side in a narrative neither of them controlled alone. At its heart, their story was a reminder of something the street forgot too easily. Power, titles, and suits could hide rot for a while, but integrity often spoke from the places everyone overlooked. And sometimes the person who changed your life forever was the one you almost laughed off. Nora hadn't. She'd asked a waiter for financial advice as a joke. His first words changed her life. And when the dust finally settled, when the hearings were over and the headlines moved on, that would remain the quiet, stubborn truth at the center of everything that followed.